Okay, believe it or not, with just everything you see here, you can make a cake. This is a 6-inch cake pan because this is a mini cake. It'll serve like, 3 people. So it's really nice if you're single and you don't want to eat a whole cake. This is a half a cup of water. You need some cider vinegar, some vegetable oil, some baking soda. That's going to react with the vinegar to make the cake rise. Oil, as I said, and some flour and some sugar. This is just plain all-purpose flour, plain white sugar, a little bit of salt. And the peanut butter is going to come in later. This is going to come in with our frosting for the cake. As you've seen in the thumbnail and title, it's a peanut butter jelly cake. So first the cake. You can just mix this right in the pan. It is so simple. Even kids could make this cake. I made this cake when I was a kid, actually. So you just dump the flour and sugar into the pan, and you dump the salt in, and also the baking soda, all the dry ingredients. I'm just mixing them with a fork, mighty fork. That's all you need for this cake. You don't need electric mixers or a KitchenAid or anything like that. Very easy, as I said. And then in a separate container, I like to use a Pyrex measuring glass just because it's easier to pour afterwards. I'm adding just a tablespoon of, or I think that was a teaspoon. Check the video description for the recipe. So that was some vinegar and some water and some oil in with the water in here. You could add vanilla extract if you had it, but this is part of an extreme emergency grocery, very low budget week, and vanilla is expensive, so you technically don't have to add vanilla to your cake. It makes it just a very, very, very plain cake, and we're putting a flavorful peanut butter and jelly topping on it, so it's okay. It's not the tastiest cake in the entire world, but it's extremely cheap. Like, I swear, this cake right here, just these ingredients, is like 10 cents. So, hey, really cheap cake. You don't want to overmix it because that develops too much of the gluten in the flour and will give you a tough cake, but you do want it to, like, not be super lumpy. So I'm just giving it some little beatings here with the fork, and as you can see, look at that, look at the bubbles. We already have some reaction happening between the baking soda and the vinegar, which is going to lift our cake. So before we lose that reaction, put that cake in a 350-degree oven. You only need to bake it for like 15-20 minutes. Check the video description for that because it's a mini cake. If you make the larger version of the cake, you need to cook it longer. Just stick a toothpick in, and if it comes out clean, it is done. And this is a moister cake than other cakes that you might be used to, by the way. Now for the topping, this is just equal parts sugar and water, and in a little tiny saucepan on the stove on a low-medium heat. If you're like a more advanced cook, well, if you're a more advanced cook, you're probably not making this recipe anyway, because it's like really basic and there are much better cakes than this. But if you know how to make caramel, you could caramelize this, and I think that would add a really nice note. But if you have no idea what I'm talking about, don't worry, it's okay. Just melt the sugar in the water until it's dissolved, until there's no more like gritty bits of sugar. And when it looks like it's starting to think about simmering, don't let it simmer, but add a couple big dollops. That's like an 1/8 to 1/4 of a cup of peanut butter. Probably more like 1/4 of a cup, I don't know. Check the video description and stir it. And it's gonna look like it's not going to incorporate at first, and you're gonna think that you're doing something terribly wrong, but don't worry, just stick to it and keep stirring it, and the peanut butter will melt. All those fats in the peanut butter will melt and it'll become nice and gooey, and over time it will smooth out into a very luscious looking sauce like this. And this seems very soupy right now as it steams up your camera lens, but when it cools down it's going to be a spreadable frosting. So this is our cake. As I said, this is a very moist cake, so if you don't like very, very, very moist pudding-like cake, don't put the jam in the inside of it like I am now. This is for the internet and I wanted it to look pretty, so I'm making a sandwich cake. But yeah, usually with this wacky cake, you don't want to turn it into a sandwich cake because it is so moist. Anyway, this is blackberry jam that I made homemade from foraged blackberries and sugar. So it's also extremely cheap. It's basically just the cost of sugar. And then you top it off with that second layer of cake. Again, if you don't mind a super moist cake. And then top it with that peanut butter frosting, which, as you can see, now that it's cooled off, it's behaving kind of more like an actual frosting. Look how glossy it is. It's really neat. This was my first time making this peanut butter frosting, and I honestly just kind of winged it. I didn't follow a recipe, and I was just like, this will probably work, and it did. So, hey, it's a really nice, simple frosting if you don't have powdered sugar or butter, which is ordinarily how I would make a peanut butter frosting. Just spread it on with a butter knife. You don't need an offset spatula or anything. Like I said, this is a very basic cake, but hey, we can garnish it with some blackberries. Believe it or not, I actually foraged these in November. I'm recording this video in November, and there are still fresh blackberries out there in the Pacific Northwest. And just, make it look a little pretty, like you put in some effort. And there you have it, a beautiful, very easy, vegan peanut butter and jelly cake, which I hope you will try. As I said, very moist cake, so, be prepared for that, but otherwise, pretty good, considering.